Running Eagle was the last of her line, the best hunter and fighter in her tribe, but her spirit was dying, for she could not give her people a future. Clay was a drifter, a cowboy who believed his fists could solve any problem. When he stumbled into their sacred lands, the elders gave him a choice: fight their champion and win his freedom, or lose and accept his fate. Clay had never lost a fight, but he had never fought a woman like her, and he never imagined that her prize would not be his death, but his seed. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the cracked earth and the man who called it home. Clay felt its heat through his worn leather hat, a constant, oppressive weight that mirrored the one in his soul. For 3 days, he'd tracked the ghost of a rumor, a hidden spring, a secret pass through the Sawtooth Mountains. He wasn't chasing a fortune, just a future. Any future that didn't have him drinking himself to death in some forgotten, dusty town. His horse, a weary roan named Dusty, snorted in protest, the sound dry and cracked in the vast, shimmering silence. Clay patted the horse's neck, his calloused hand a brief comfort. "I know, boy," he muttered, his voice a rusty hinge. "Not much farther now." He was lying, and they both knew it. He'd been saying the same thing since dawn. He was a man who navigated by pride, and for the first time in his life, he was beginning to suspect his compass was broken. He was a drifter by trade, but he was just beginning to understand that he was a runner by nature, running from the memory of a family he'd failed, a name he'd sullied, and the gnawing truth that his fists, for all their power, couldn't punch a hole in the past. He saw it without really seeing it. A line of stones, no different from the thousands of others littering the landscape, but arranged with a purpose that felt alien to the chaos of the desert. A boundary, a warning. His pride, that old familiar devil on his shoulder, scoffed at it. It was just a line of rocks. But a deeper instinct, the one that had kept him alive through 2 range wars and a stint in a Mexican jail, screamed at him to turn back. He ignored it. 1 more mile, he promised himself. 1 more hour until sundown. He pushed Dusty forward, and as the horse's hoof crossed the line, the world seemed to hold its breath. The chirp of insects died, the wind stilled. The oppressive heat was suddenly replaced by a cold, watchful presence. He'd made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. They rose from the earth like spirits of vengeance, their movements so silent and fluid he didn't see them until they were already there, surrounding him. Apache. Their faces were masks of ochre and duty, their arrows already nocked, their eyes holding the cold, hard light of the land itself. Clay's hand twitched towards his Colt, but he knew. He knew it was over before it began. There was no fight here. This was a reckoning. The Apache camp was a living thing, a small island of order in the wild wilderness. Teepees, painted with the stories of generations, reached towards a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and a deep, earthy smell of belonging that Clay had never known. He was a prisoner, his hands bound, his pride a raw, open wound. They brought him to the center of the camp, before a council of 3 elders who sat on buffalo hides, their faces maps of time and wisdom. The oldest, a man with eyes as dark and deep as the desert night, spoke, his voice the sound of stones grinding together. "You have trespassed on the land of whispering spirits," the old man said, his words translated by a younger brave. "Our law is old, and it is clear. A life for a life. Your presence here has stolen a piece of our spirit. You must pay it back." Clay's jaw tightened. "I ain't paying nothing," he growled. The elder simply nodded, as if expecting the response. "The spirits will decide the payment. You will face our champion. If you win, you ride away, and we will not hunt you. If you lose, you will accept the prize of the victor." A cold dread, colder than any winter night, settled in Clay's gut. He had no choice. He had fought his whole life. This would be no different. "Bring him on, then," he said, his voice full of a bravado he did not feel.
He expected a giant, a hulking warrior with muscles like granite and a scowl that could curdle milk. The crowd of warriors parted, and Clay's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman. She moved with the predatory grace of a mountain lion, her body a testament to a life of hardship and battle. This was Running Eagle. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, met his, and he saw no fear, no hesitation. He saw only a fire, a deep, burning resolve that seemed to scorch him from across the circle. He saw the whispers of old wounds on her arms, the tension in her jaw that spoke of a burden he could not comprehend. And he saw something else. In the faces of the warriors, the elders, even the children, he saw a reverence, a desperate hope that all seemed to rest upon her shoulders. This was no ordinary woman. This was their future. The fight began. It was not a brawl. It was a storm. He was a cyclone of brute force, his fists like sledgehammers, each blow meant to shatter bone. She was the wind itself, flowing around him, using his momentum against him. Her spear was a living thing, a serpent of wood and stone that darted and feinted, keeping him constantly off balance. He was stronger, but she was smarter. He fought with rage, she fought with purpose. The dust swirled, the crowd a blur of silent watching faces. In a desperate lunge, he managed to grab the front of her buckskin tunic, the leather tearing under his raw strength. For a single fleeting moment he saw it, not skin, but a thin linen bandage wrapped tightly around her ribs, a hint of old blood seeping through. She was wounded, and still she was winning. That knowledge, the sight of her vulnerability, ignited a fresh fire in him. The shame of being beaten by a woman was one thing. Being beaten by a wounded woman was another. He roared, a sound of pure primal fury, and charged. It was the mistake she had been waiting for. With a movement too fast to follow, she dropped her spear, sidestepped his clumsy attack, and drove her foot into the back of his knee. The joint buckled with a sickening pop, and Clay crashed to the ground, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Before he could recover, she was on him, a whirlwind of controlled fury. Her knee pressed down on his chest, a solid, unyielding weight that pinned him to the earth. The world narrowed to the feel of the dirt on his cheek, the thunder of his own heart in his ears, and the woman looming over him. He saw the torn tunic, the bandage beneath, and the face of a warrior who had sacrificed everything for her people. She brought a knife not to his throat, but to his cheek, the cold flat steel a shocking, intimate touch. The setting sun cast her in a silhouette of gold and blood. The crowd was silent. The elders watched, their faces unreadable. Running Eagle looked down at the man beneath her, the man whose life was now hers to take or to spare. Her voice, when she spoke, was not triumphant, but was filled with the weight of generations, a quiet, unbreakable command. "Your life is mine," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I will not take it, but you will pay your debt." Clay glared up at her, his mind reeling, his body screaming in protest. "What do you want?" he spat, his voice thick with dust and defeat. "Horses? My gun?" A flicker of something that was not humor, but a deep ancient sadness crossed her face. "I do not want your trinkets, cowboy. I want your future. I want the one thing you can give my people that will last. You will be my prize." Her eyes held his, and in their depths, he saw the future she was talking about. A future so impossible, so intimate, it stole the very breath from his lungs. "You will Give me a son.
Clay's world had been built on a foundation of simple truths. A faster gun hand won, a stronger fist prevailed, and a man's pride was his only real possession. In the space of a single heartbeat, Running Eagle had shattered all three. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. A quiet, brutal war fought not with weapons, but with silence and expectation. He was not a prisoner in chains, but in purpose. The tribe treated him not as a captive, but as a consecrated object, a tool for their survival. Warriors would nod at him with a respect that felt more humiliating than any sneer. Women would leave bowls of food outside the teepee he was now forced to share with her, their faces averted as if he were a sacred spirit, not a man. His servitude was absolute. He chopped the wood that fueled her fire. He hunted the deer that filled her stew. He cleaned the weapons she would use to defend the very people who had taken his freedom. Every act of labor was a reminder of his defeat, a constant galling friction against the raw wound of his pride. He was a ghost in their world, his own life effectively over, existing only to create another. And then there was her. Running Eagle was a creature of ritual and discipline. She would rise before the sun, her movements a silent prayer to the waking world. She would tend to her duties as the tribe's war leader with an unwavering focus, her authority unquestioned. She spoke to him only in commands, her voice a flat, unemotional instrument of her will. The water skins are empty. The fire needs wood. The hides need scraping. There was no cruelty in it, but no kindness either. It was the detached command of a master to a tool. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the camp was asleep and the fire in the teepee had burned down to glowing embers, he would see the cracks in her armor. He would see her place a hand on her still flat stomach, a look of such profound hope and fear on her face that it made his own chest ache. He would see her wince as she rewrapped the linen bandage around her ribs, a secret wound she never spoke of. In those stolen glances, she was not a warrior chief. She was just a woman, alone, carrying a burden that was impossibly heavy. It was a vulnerability that infuriated him because it made her real, and it made his hatred for her feel complicated. One night, as a storm raged outside, the thunder echoing the turmoil in his own soul, the silence in the teepee became too much to bear. "Why me?" he finally snarled, the words clawing their way out of his throat. "There are 100 warriors out there, stronger, better than me. Why choose the enemy?" Running Eagle didn't look at him. She was sharpening her father's hunting knife by the firelight, her hands steady, her focus absolute. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and even. "They see you as a symbol of the world that is coming, a world of invaders, of fences and iron horses, a world that will not mix with ours." She finally lifted her eyes, and they burned with an intensity that stunned him into silence. "My son must be able to walk in both worlds. He will have the blood of the Apache, the heart of our people, but he will have your face, your skin, a face that the new world will not see as a threat." Clay stared at her, the bitter anger in him slowly curdling into something else, something colder, horror. He was not just a means to an heir. He was a camouflage, a genetic disguise to protect her child from a future she already saw coming. The revelation settled in his bones like a killing frost. His purpose was not just an insult to his pride. It was a strategic desecration of his very identity. He began to watch her with new eyes, not as a captor, but as a strategist. He saw the way she planned patrols, the way she rationed supplies, the way she trained the young boys not just to fight, but to think. He saw a leader preparing for a war she knew she couldn't win, but was determined to survive. The intimacy of their forced life became a battlefield of unspoken thoughts. He would feel her gaze on him as he worked, and he would know she was not seeing him, but the face of her future son. The air in the teepee crackled with a tension that was more than just hatred. It was a terrifying, unwilling connection forged in a crucible of survival and sacrifice. He was a tool, but he was a thinking tool. And his mind began to race, not with plans of escape, but with a far more dangerous idea. An idea of how to reclaim a piece of himself in this impossible bargain. One night, as a storm raged outside, the thunder echoing the turmoil in his own soul, the silence in the teepee became too much to bear. "Why me?" he finally snarled, the words clawing their way out of his throat. "There are 100 warriors out there, stronger, better than me. Why choose the enemy?" Running Eagle didn't look at him. She was sharpening her father's hunting knife by the firelight, her hands steady, her focus absolute. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and even. "They see you as a symbol of the world that is coming. A world of invaders, of fences and iron horses. A world that will not mix with ours." She finally lifted her eyes, and they burned with an intensity that stunned him into silence. "My son must be able to walk in both worlds. He will have the blood of the Apache, the heart of our people, but he will have your face, your skin, a face that the New World will not see as a threat." Clay stared at her, the bitter anger in him slowly curdling into something else. Something colder. Horror. He was not just a means to an heir. He was a camouflage, a genetic disguise to protect her child from a future she already saw coming. For a long moment, the world in the teepee shrunk to the space between them, a battlefield of wills crackling with unspoken fire. Running Eagle's eyes were pools of disbelief and fury. No one had given her an order since she was a child. He saw her knuckles whiten around the hilt of her knife. He saw the flicker of a dozen different ways she could kill him before his next breath. And then he saw the fight drained from her, replaced by a wave of exhaustion so profound it seemed to pull her towards the earth. Her shoulders slumped. The knife slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the packed dirt. She slowly, deliberately, sat down on the furs by the fire. She did not look at him. She stared into the flames, her profile a mask of unbreakable pride, now fractured by a single, terrifying crack of vulnerability. Clay's heart hammered against his ribs. He had won. He had pushed back, and the world had not ended. He picked up her knife, its weight both a threat and a promise. Then, with movements that were surprisingly gentle, he knelt before her. "Where did you get the wound?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of its earlier aggression. She remained silent, but she did not pull away as he carefully began to unlace the torn tunic. The wound was a nasty one, a deep gash from a cougar's claw, stitched with clumsy sinew and flamed with infection. He worked in silence, cleaning the wound with whiskey from his own hidden flask and fresh bandages torn from his spare shirt. His hands, accustomed to the brute force of a hammer or the cold certainty of a pistol, were now tasked with an act of healing. He could feel the heat of her skin, the tremor that ran through her body at his touch. It was the most intimate act of his life, a strange and holy communion in the flickering firelight. He worked not as a servant, but as a man tending to something precious. When he was done, he gently covered her with a thick buffalo hide. Her eyes were closed, but he knew she was not asleep. He sat back on his own furs across the fire. The silence between them no longer a weapon, but a shared space. "The cat," she finally whispered.
her voice barely a breath. It cornered one of the children. I was too snow. He said nothing. He didn't need to. In that one admission, he understood everything. The secret wound, the desperate bargain for a son, the crushing weight of her duty. It wasn't a prize she had claimed from him. It was a prayer she was making to a future she was terrified she would not live to see. Their world changed. The line between captor and captive blurred, then vanished. He was no longer her prize, and she was no longer her master. They were simply two people, bound together by a shared fate on a small patch of land against a hostile world. He still worked the land, but now he worked for them. He tended to her wound, and in doing so, tended to the wounds in himself he thought were long dead. He taught her how to aim a rifle, and she taught him which roots healed a fever and which stars guided you home in the dark. They spoke of their pasts not as confessions, but as quiet offerings of trust. He told her of the wife and child he'd lost to cholera, the failure that had driven him into the wilderness. She told him of her mate, a great warrior who had died fighting raiders, leaving her with the impossible task of leading a people while carrying its last hope in her womb. They were two broken halves of a single shattered soul, finding in each other an unexpected peace. One night, under a canopy of 1,000,000 stars, he reached across the embers and took her hand. It was not an act of lust, but of belonging. She did not pull away. The bargain, once a curse, had become a blessing in disguise.
Weeks bled into months. The child in her belly grew, and with it a new life for them both. The thread of her old wound faded, replaced by the glow of health. The haunted look in Clay's eyes was replaced by the calm, steady gaze of a man who had found his purpose. But the world outside their small island of peace did not sleep. A rival warrior from a neighboring clan, Stonehand, the one who had wounded her mate and coveted her power, had heard the whispers of a white man in Running Eagle's camp. He saw not an heir, but an abomination, an excuse to seize control. He came at dawn, not with a challenge, but with an army, his war cries ripping through the morning stillness. Clay and Running Eagle stood side by side at the edge of the camp, not as captor and prize, but as equals, as partners. They fought with the ferocity of two souls defending not just their lives, but their future. It was a brutal, bloody clash of old and new. She moved with her spear and knife, a dance of deadly grace. He stood his ground with his rifle and Colt, a bulwark of fire and lead. Together, they were a force the invaders had not expected. At the height of the battle, Stonehand broke through their lines and charged at Running Eagle, his tomahawk raised high. Clay saw it, a heartbeat of pure, cold terror. He threw himself in front of her, his own body a shield. The tomahawk bit deep into her shoulder, the pain a white-hot explosion. But it gave her the opening she needed. With a warrior's cry that was both a lament and a promise, she drove her spear through Stonehand's heart. He woke to the smell of herbs and the soft touch of her hand on his brow. He was in the teepee, the battle over. His shoulder was a symphony of agony, but he was alive. Running Eagle was beside him, her face etched with a fear he had never seen before. "You were foolish," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "You are worth more alive than dead." He managed a weak, lopsided grin. "Someone had to protect the mother of my son," he rasped. The word, once a curse, now felt like a prayer on his lips. She said nothing, but a single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. The debt was paid.
He was, by their law, a free man. Free to leave, free to ride away and never look back. But as he looked at this woman, this fierce, wounded, magnificent warrior who had saved him in more ways than she would ever know, he realized a simple, profound truth. He had come to this place a prisoner, but for the first time in his life, he was finally home. He did not leave. When the child was born, a boy with his mother's fierce eyes and a tuft of his father's sandy hair, the tribe celebrated not just the birth of an heir, but the birth of a new beginning. Clay, the cowboy, the drifter, the prize won in a fight, had found his place not as a servant, but as a protector, a partner, and a father. The line of stones that had once marked a boundary of trespass was now the border of his world, a world he would defend with his last breath. He had lost a fight and his freedom, only to win a family and a love deeper and wilder than any freedom he had ever known.